Very good afternoon to you. If you're just joining us, let's get into this important discussion now. And we unpack the budget even further before the minister even tables his most anticipated budget. We're joined by Dr. Miriam Altman. She is with the National Planning Commission and a commissioner there. You can see she is on screen. Reuben Maleka is with the Public Servants Association. There you see him at the bottom of your screen. And to the left of Miriam Altman is Matthew Parks, and he is Cosatu's parliamentary co-ordinator. To you all, my thank you for joining us. Let me start with you, Dr. Altman. How would you describe the state of the South African economy right now?
Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that we're in trouble. The economy was going down before COVID. As with every country around the world, we fell further. We had an economy that was already challenged by extremely high unemployment and inequality and poverty relative to other middle-income countries. And of course, COVID attacks that directly. And we expect either way for there to be some bounce back. But the reality is that the IMF has just downgraded our forecast for the next couple of years because of concerns about uncertainty around whether the structural reforms would happen. And one hopes one's going to hear from the minister a little bit more about that.
Let me come to you, Matthew Parks, and ask you as a leader of the Labour Federation, what your expectations are against the very background that Dr. Altman speaks about.
Sure. Look, I think first we've been in an economic crisis long before we ever heard of COVID-19, Xoli. We would expect the budget to speak to the progressive commitments made by the president in the State of the Nation address last week. We don't need new plans. We just need to see the simple resourcing and timeframes for these agreements. So we expect to see a further reinforcement of the vaccine and the health front against COVID-19. We would expect to see the extension of various measures of economic and social relief to distressed workers and companies and communities, like the 350 grant, the unemployment insurance fund, the loan guarantee scheme, and other forms of assistance. But also we need to see a very clear resourcing and timeframes for the economic recovery plan, where there's very progressive commitments, but they need to be resourced. So that includes local procurement, it includes stabilizing the state-owned enterprises, it includes investing in energy, generation and maintenance. But equally, Xoli, we have to address the fiscal crisis facing the state, which is the 10% of the budget we lose to corruption and wasteful expenditure, the declining levels of economic growth, and of course, the massive amounts we've lost in tax collection due to the state. So I think for us, it's quite a huge amount of tasks facing government, but we really need to see government rising to the occasion and providing practical interventions and plans to address these.
Yeah. Mr. Maleka, a cost-cutting exercise is going to have to be part and parcel of the Minister of Finance's speech on Wednesday. And I say this to you against the background, if you will recall, Moody's on the 8th of February, that was a Monday, they sent out an opinion where they were warning that South Africa might possibly see another credit rating downgrade as a result of things like the inability to manage debt by government. Where do you see your expectation fitting in against this environment?
Thank you very much, Xoli, and my colleagues that are there. First of all, our most pertinent three issues that we want to see that the minister addresses is how is he going to capacitate the state? We need the state that is able to function. I'm looking at the border management, SARS, NPA, SIU, correctional service, and police. Secondly, we want to hear how he's going to fund the rollout of vaccine. And thirdly, to see that where is NHI? Because we have just recently been in the process to roll out a vaccine, but we can see our hospitals and clinics are not ready. So we want to hear him talking back again the issue of NHI. But lastly, we cannot forget also the debt that he has with us, which is to fund the last leg of Resolution 1 of 2018. And if he addresses those three things and stop also bailing out SOEs, we'll be seeing that there will be change, there will be implementation that can take this country forward.
Dr. Altman, let me come back to you. You've heard Reuben Maleka, you've heard Matthew Parks. Where does the finance minister find the money to increase the salaries of public servants on the one hand, whilst maintaining fiscal consolidation on the other? Might this require him to raise taxes, which is something that people like myself and the general public out there might be very aggrieved about?
I'd love for us to have a more dynamic discussion rather than a static one. A static discussion says we want to cut cost or raise taxes. And of course, that has to be part of the consideration. But a dynamic discussion says we need to get better performance in the public service. The public service is very critical. We've got to get away from this idea that it's bloated. You know, it's a kind of discourse that doesn't take us anywhere. So when we say we need to fund the increase in public service salaries going forward, well, I don't know that that's the case. Is it possible to have, and I'm not saying that I'm in the middle of any kind of negotiation at all, but some kind of more positive engagement needs to happen that creates a long-term strategy that looks at trade-offs between, say, wages and benefits. In other words, you may increase the benefits, you may secure jobs, you may do some kind of deal around wages, you may have stronger performance requirements, you may have an agreement that says we're going to have fewer paper pushers and more nurses and porters and teachers, which is something that we do need. That's not a place where we're bloated, and police and people in the justice system. That's a productive discussion against which we could get some dynamic improvements year on year. But right now we're kind of on a hiding to nothing when we just talk about, well, how do we raise salaries and are we going to get it from taxes or are we just going to cut public servants? It'll never go anywhere, that kind of engagement.
Matthew Parks, how do you respond to that? There needs to be a dynamic discussion that moves away from the static that we have been engaged about as a country.
Look, as Cosatu, as trade union movement, we always support engagement in social compacts. We think you have to have government, business, labor working together to find the solutions. No single party has got it on its own. But we also need to know that when we negotiate with government and employers, that they will respect collective bargaining. What we've had around the public service wage board now is where government unilaterally walked away from a legally binding agreement that is signed in good faith by all parties. So it's very difficult to know if you're negotiating with somebody who's going to honor the agreement or they're just simply going to walk away when times are tough. We think there are ways to address each other's concerns. The fundamental cause of the fiscal crisis is not the wage bill, which has been stable at 35% of the budget for 12 years. The crisis is that we lose 10% of the budget to corruption and wasteful expenditure. We're having to bail out SOEs time and again because they were broken due to mismanagement and corruption and structural changes. We're having declining tax revenues because of tax evasions, customs evasions, and also a stagnant economy. So you have to address those fundamental issues, and that can unlock it. What we're seeing in the public service is that it's an increasingly demoralized, decapacitated public service. If you impose a 4-year wage freeze, the consequence is going to be that you're going to see a brain drain of skilled workers in the public service, like nurses and doctors, teachers, police officers, etc., who will go to the private sector, who will go overseas to better paying jobs. So we need to get the balance right. But also for government to be taken seriously, we need to see cuts in what politicians earn, the size of the cabinet or what managers earn. We need to have a single wage negotiation process for the entire state. And we need to address the culture of wasteful expenditure at a management level.
Yeah.
So there are ways to do it, but government has to engage in good faith.
Reuben Maleka, is it fair for public servants to be demanding salary increases when they are said to be unprofessional? So, for example, the president, I think again, in his State of the Nation address, talking about professionalizing the public service. There's even now a school of government that's been created in order to address this very issue. Can your members not do without an increase, knowing the kinds of pressures that are on the fiscus right now?
Yeah. First of all, let me appreciate the view that was expressed by Miriam to say that indeed the public service is not bloated. And that's a good point, and that is a fact. Your question can be answered in this way, to say that the public service, when people refer to the public service, unfortunately, they only refer to the public service, not the public sector. Because here we are sitting with the problem of having a public sector, but when we talk only about public service. Because if we talk about three spheres of government, the local government, the provincial, and the national, and you also include SOEs, you'd only find that because of different salary structures and different pay systems that are coming from these three spheres of government, there are anomalies that are causing a scenario as if public servants are highly paid. I think it's time that we sit down and talk about how the public sector remuneration can be structured. Then that can resolve a view of that public service wage bill is huge, because we don't include the municipalities, we don't include even the ministers when you talk about public service, but they eat from the same fiscus. I think that's the point that needs to be taken, where we actually deal with the public sector in totality and look at the pay structure and align it. You'll find that public servants are not highly paid. They actually deserve more salary adjustment.
Yeah. Miriam, Altman, let me come back to you, and perhaps this might be the point where we wrap up our discussion. There is something that was said and reported on by the Business Day on the 10th of February, and the headline went, "Brain drain threat to recovery." And these were the words of the Rand Merchant Bank boss. And this is about South Africa losing people in their 30s, according to this CEO. And these are South Africans in their 30s and 40s who are qualified and experienced. Now, how in the world are we going to manage this recovery process, Dr. Altman, if, for example, the Institute of Civil Engineering in South Africa reported in the past 3 years that it had lost 1.73% of its members in those ages of 30 and 60 because they left for overseas to much better, economic environment there. Do we stand a chance of actually recovering this economy when we're going to have a brain drain?
Well, I suspect that the civil engineering sector lost more than that. I think a decimal point or two are missing from that quote. The civil engineering sector has hollowed out quite a bit, and people have gone overseas. Certainly that's something you can do. We can import skills, we can develop skills, we can strengthen the pipeline of capability coming out of post-school education. We can have mentorship. There's all kinds of ways of developing human capability for a recovery. The scarce skills plan, regulations that just came out, I haven't personally reviewed them, but my view is open the doors and let skilled people come in and let them compete, and let's have a bigger group of people. That's how countries like Canada and Australia developed. The thing that I wanted to get back to is that in my experience anyway, and I could be wrong, is that sometimes people leave the public service for better wages, but in my experience, good people leave because they're alienated in the public sector, and then they find better opportunities. So if we can improve, and there is an agenda to do that at the moment, but if we can improve human resource management, the way personnel is treated, stabilize the relationships. It can be a very toxic environment right now that alienates good people. Corruption has not helped, but it goes beyond that. What I would challenge some of my co-speakers to is that we have a tendency in this country to talk about what everybody else can do. And I think what we each need to do, all of us, is talk about what we can do. So, when we're engaging with the PSA and Cosatu, if I could just say, I'd love to hear what you think the solutions are. Let's not dream that there's more money in the budget. There is not more money in the budget. There simply isn't. That is just the reality. So the question is, how can we deliver better service more efficiently get more performance out of the people we have? How do we raise the skills base? How do we have happier workers who want to deliver, better managed? How do we get communities more involved in education services, et cetera? Can we get a dynamic discussion as opposed to necessarily deflecting and also just wishing that there's more money for higher wages? I'm just not sure that that's also going to take us down a productive pathway in this regard.
Oh, Matthew Parks, perhaps you get to have the last bite on the cherry. We're completely out of time, but how do you even begin to respond to Miriam Altman, who's just said those words? But perhaps let's end it here, Matthew Parks. He agrees. Do you agree?
I'm guessing why wouldn't you agree with what I've just said? If you think about it.
Not only do we agree, we've actually already been doing that, Xoli and Miriam. So during this past year, we pumped out over 60 billion rand from the Unemployment Insurance Fund into the economy to save workers' jobs, to save companies, keep the doors open. We drafted the Eskom Social Compact, which has been adopted as our contribution as Labour to helping fix what are national goods, which all of us need to survive on. We put many of our proposals in the Economic Recovery Plan, and a key pillar of the recovery plan is about ramping up local procurement. We're in the process now as Cosatu of appointing local procurement champions in our different unions and our different structures to make sure that not only we as unions at our small little procurement level, but also in our workplaces and our sectors and our bargaining councils, we ramp up and we drive local procurement and hold companies and colleagues to account. So as Miriam said, we all have to contribute. We're more than willing to play our part. But also we need to know that government and business will also play their part, because it requires all of us to contribute to a national crisis on many fronts.
All right. My thanks to you all. Reuben, Maleka, unfortunately, I've completely run out of time. You're going to have to forgive me, but thank you for your participation. Dr. Miriam Altman, thanks indeed for your contribution as well.